I stiffed him on accident with the knee, and he wasn't happy with it, so he clobbered me in the side of the head. And I like to think I'm the only human on earth that's ever taken a right hand for Brock and didn't go night-night. I went 20 more minutes in the match.
People say he is intimidating and that is not simply a phrase someone invented for a thumbnail. That is the honest truth about Brock Lesnar. He is scary in a way that most WWE performers have never experienced with any other person in the locker room. Scary like a well-delivered promo or a dramatic stare-down press conference. Scary like your body sends you a signal that something is genuinely wrong and you need to move right now, because the consequences of staying still are real and they are permanent. That panic became very real inside the Elimination Chamber in 2022. Before we go any further, if you want to show some love for this story, use the hype feature below and give hype to this video right now. It takes seconds and it genuinely helps more people find stories. Now back to the chamber, because what happened in that match tells you everything you need to understand about what kind of performer Brock Lesnar truly was behind the spectacle and the championship reign. Bobby Lashley had been ruled out under concussion protocol before the match even properly began. Lesnar, without his scheduled rival and without a clear designated role in the structure everyone else planned around. So Lesnar broke out of his pod early. He was not waiting for his turn. He was not respecting the rhythm that the other participants had organized themselves around. He started hunting. The target was Austin Theory, one of the youngest and least protected performers in the entire match. Theory saw what was coming towards him, and he did exactly what any rational human being do when a man of Brock Lesnar's size, physical credibility, and clear intent starts moving in your direction without any visible intention to slow. He ran. He climbed the chamber structure, going upward toward the roof, putting as much vertical space as physically possible between himself and this man. Brock followed him up the structure without any hesitation. He caught Theory at the top. He smashed Theory's face against the plexiglass wall of the chamber, and then he executed an F5 from the roof of one of the pods directly down hard chamber floor far below. The drop was substantial. The impact was violent. The spot was genuinely dangerous in a way that went beyond the normal parameters of WWE risk calculation, and it nearly ended Theory's career before it had fully developed. Any small error in the grip, the rotation, or the release point, Theory could have landed catastrophic. Theory later described what that moment felt like from the inside. He said he was just terrified. He said he was thinking, okay, and then sure enough, Brock started chasing. Those words were not a performance constructed after fact. It was a young performer describing what it felt like to understand in real time that the person coming for him was operating by different rules everyone else in that build. That is the central question at the center of everything you are about to hear. How did one man make young talents, established legends, and even the experienced backstage staff responsible for the entire production act as though they were facing genuine and uncontrolled danger from another person in the same work? To understand that, you need to understand what made Brock Lesnar fundamentally and structurally different from every other performer who has ever worked inside a WWE ring. Professional wrestling is built on a foundational covenant between the people who perform in it. Covenant says performers protect each other. You work together with your partner. Execute move in a way that simulates extreme violence while minimizing the real physical risk to the person receiving it. You communicate before the match and during. You adjust when the plan changes. You make sure the person across from you goes home at the end of the night with their body intact. Is the baseline assumption that every person in that locker room carries when they step through the curtain. It is not a formal written contract. It is not officially policed. It is simply the understood agreement that makes the entire enterprise function safely and consistent. Brock Lesnar disrupted that baseline in a way that was entirely his own and entirely without precedent in the modern era WWE. He was not simply a large and well-conditioned athlete who had been developed for a television product. He was NCAA Division I heavyweight champ at the most dominant level the collegiate system used. He was a legitimate UFC heavyweight champ who had defeated men whose full-time professional occupation was inflicting physical damage on other trained fighters. He carried verified and documented combat credentials that nobody else on that roster could come close to matching at any point in their respective careers. When he stepped into a ring, there was always a genuine incredible possibility that what happened next would not be entirely scripted or controlled in the way that the audience assumed it was. Everyone in WWE understood that possibility and worked around it constantly, whether they spoke about it openly or preferred to keep that understanding private. Most wrestlers operate entirely within the covenant, trust their partner. They communicate throughout a match. They adjust when something unexpected occurs. They protect the person across from them because that is what business requires from everyone who participates in. And because they understand some future point, they will be the one on the receiving end. Brock sometimes created conditions where the covenant felt like it did not apply to him in the same way it applied to everyone else. The results of that felt broken bone, legitimate blood drawn without the full consent of the person losing it, in genuine fear that existed in the building before, during, and after any event he was part, and in a locker room that developed a quiet and collective understanding that the normal safety parameters shift when Brock Lesnar was scheduled to compete. The weight of that understanding was not hypothetical. It was lived and demonstrated across years of real events, real injuries, and real moments of fear that nobody in that building could dismiss as coincidental or accidental. Every time the pattern repeated itself, it reinforced the same. The business had a participant who existed outside the standard frame, and the standard frame had been deliberately modified to accommodate that existence rather than to constrain. The person who experienced those consequences more physically than almost anyone else in the history of their encounter was Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle is an Olympic gold medalist freestyle wrestler. He competed at the absolute highest level that amateur wrestling produces anywhere in the world. He is not someone with a fragile constitution. He is not given to exaggerating a physical experience when describing it years after fact. He is precise and measured when he speaks about things that happened to him. When he described what sharing a ring with Brock did to his physical body across the course of their matches together, the words he chooses carry the weight of someone who has had significant time to process what he went and has arrived at a clear and simple account of Brock Lesnar broke his neck not once, twice. The first fracture came from a steel chair shot. Veterans in WWE had long developed a clear and practically applied understanding of how to deliver chair strikes without causing serious spinal damage. The standard method was to aim the chair horizontally so it connected across the shoulders and upper back, distributing the force across a broad enough surface area that the impact primarily absorbed by muscle and bone structure without compromising cervical spine. That approach produces an enormous convincing sound on camera, creates a visually devastating impression for anyone watching, keeps the person receiving the strike physically safe. Chris Benoit was among the performers who consistently insisted on this method throughout his career because he understood the anatomy involved and understood precisely what a differently angled strike could do to a person's neck if the force was directed incorrect. Brock did not use that method. He delivered the chair in a downward vertical arc that connected directly on the top of Angle's skull. The force had no horizontal distribution to work. It went straight down through the cervical spine. Two of Angle's vertebrae cracked immediately on impact, not compressed gradually under sustained load, not bruised from the collision, cracked. Second fracture came from a spot that has been executed thousands of times in WWE rings throughout the history of the company without producing a serious injury in most of those instances. A corner tack. Brock running at distance toward Angle, standing in the corner turn. Standard and common piece of in-ring vocabulary that is designed with the natural cushioning of the ring structure in mind. The difficulty is that Brock's physical mass and the velocity he generates when he commits to a full run are not comparable to the numbers a standard former produces. The combination overwhelmed the cushioning. The impact too much for the normal protective properties of the ring to manage. Angle's neck was fractured for the second time. Consider what that means with its full weight applied. An Olympic gold medalist who had competed at the pinnacle of physical wrestling, who had built one of the most admired in-ring careers in WWE history, who had absorbed genuine punishment from some of the hardest working and most physically demanding performers across multiple generations of the business, telling you direct and clearly that Brock Lesnar broke neck twice. Two separate fractures from two separate incidents across their matches together. If a man with those credentials and that history is giving you that assessment without any apparent exaggeration, exaggeration. Communicates something direct and specific about the level of risk that every other performer faced. Brock was accepting when they stepped into program. The chair shot and the corner tackle were not isolated incidents from a single bad night. They were part of a sustained physical reality that characterized what it meant to share a ring with Brock across an extended period. Cumulative damage was extraordinary by the standard of an industry that already asks a great deal of human body. Angle carried that damage forward across career and into the years that followed. The cost did not stay in the ring when the match ended. Came home with him every single time. And the fear was not exclusively physical in its expression. Carried equal weight in the psychological. Seth Rollins holds both aspects of that experience across different moments in his career with Lesnar. In 2015, when the Authority made the on-screen announcement that Brock Lesnar would be the challenger for Rollins' WWE World Heavyweight Championship, the reaction visible on Rollins' face in that moment was not entirely a carefully constructed and rehearsed performance. Revelation landed because he understood what it meant in physical terms. He had watched Brock compete. He had absorbed the information available from what Brock had done to other people across his career. He knew that stepping into a sustained program Lesnar was a fundamentally different physical proposition than stepping into one with any other opponent on the roster, not primarily because of the narrative stakes, but because of the physical cost that would be required to deliver the performance at the level it would need to reach. 4 years after that announcement, in August 2019, Understand was converted into direct physical experience on Monday Night Raw. Rollins suffered a severe rib injury during his ongoing rivalry with Lesnar. Rib injuries are among the most disabling and persistent injuries a performer in any contact sport can carry. Every breath involves the ribcage in some mechanical way. Every movement that engages the torso, and in a professional wrestling match, essentially every movement engages the torso, carries a degree of pain that compounds with effort and time. Recovery is slow and difficult because the kind of rest that would allow genuine healing is incompatible with the schedule and the demands of being a featured performer on a major show. The injury came from the level of force that Lesnar consistently operates at in his matches, a level that exceeds what most WWE performers generate, even in their most intensely physical moments. Despite that injury, Rollins felt the weight of the situation pressing him to keep showing up, keep competing, keep being fully present in that rival, because the professional stakes were too high and the eyes on that program were too many to justify stepping back from it. The emotional and physical burden of being placed opposite Brock Lesnar extended well beyond any single night. It was carried between events and long after the program had eventually concluded and moved on. The psychological dimension of that burden deserves specific acknowledgement because it is often overlooked in discussions that focus primarily on physical injury. Knowing that your opponent has a history of causing legitimate and serious physical harm, people around still having to perform full commitment against him in front of a live audience requires a specific kind of professional courage that should not be taken granted by anyone watching from the outside. Rollins demonstrated that courage consistently. The fact that it had to be demonstrated at all says something important about how that situation should have been managed. That is worth stating clearly because it represents something specific about the culture that the Beast Paradigm created inside that locker. When you know the person you are working has a documented history of causing real injury, and when you know the organization has chosen to maintain that person's presence with full knowledge of that history, the psychological pressure does not stay in the building on match night. It travels with you. It exists in the preparation, in conversation, colleagues and trainers, in the moments before you walk through the curtain. Rollins absorbed all of it and continued performing at an elite level. Context matters when you assess what his career during that period actually cost him. That was not acting. Was a human being carrying a real cost that would not resolve cleanly once the cameras moved on to the next story. And then there is the moment that illustrates most directly and honestly what Brock Lesnar was prepared to do inside the ring when he felt the terms of the shared agreement had been breached without consent. During the 2018 Royal Rumble, his opponent was Braun Strowman. Strowman is not a small performer by any reasonable standard of measurement. He was at that time one of the most physically imposing athletes WWE developed in the modern era. He weighed in the region of 385 pounds. He is a man who commands attention and generates a physical impression simply by entering a room. During the match, Strowman Strowman accidentally landed a stiff knee strike on Lesnar. It was not deliberate. It was the kind of unplanned collision that happens when two very large, physically powerful men are moving full pace in close physical proximity to each other. An accidental impact. The kind of thing that normally gets communicated about between the two performers and adjusted in the natural flow of match. Brock's response did not involve any communication or collaborative adjustment. He delivered a real, closed-fisted punch directly to the side of Strowman's head. This was not a worked strike calibrated to look impactful while directing the force away from the person received. This was a genuine punch. He also issued a verbal instruction to Strowman, delivered at a volume that made it audible to others, telling him to slow down. Physical enforcement delivered in its most literal and unambiguous form. He used his fists to make clear that the match would proceed at his pace and by his terms, and that any deviation from those terms would be corrected with immediate real force. Strowman later described what happened with characteristic directness. He said he had accidentally stiffed Brock with the knee, and Brock was not happy about it. So Brock clobbered him in the side of the head. And then Strowman said the words that do the most work in this context. He said it did not feel good. A man of Strowman's physical composition and documented toughness telling you direct Brock Lesnar hit him, and it did not feel good. The understatement in that description is doing significant. Even the largest and most physically formidable performers on the roster were not exempt from the legitimate pain that Brock could deliver when he chose to respond with genuine force rather than theatrical performance. No amount of size or professional reputation or physical credibility offered protection from it. The enforcement was the message, and that message was received by everyone in that locker room, whether they were present in the ring that night or heard the story through the normal flow of information in a shared workplace. In-ring enforcement this kind creates a specific and troubling dynamic. It means that every performer who steps into the ring with Brock has to carry an additional calculation alongside the normal demands of executing a match. They have to consider not only how to perform well, but also how to avoid triggering a response that will move outside the theatrical parameters of the match without notice or consent. That extra layer of caution is itself a cost. It changes how people move, how they communicate, how much risk they are willing to take with the creative ambition of the work. It narrows what the match can be before it ever begins. But the single event that exposed most completely the full depth and the deliberately constructed nature paradigm happened at SummerSlam 2016. Lesnar against Randy Orton. The match had been designed to reach its conclusion by technical knockout, format chosen specific to allow for a more physically direct and less conventionally scripted kind of act than a standard WWE finish would permit. Orton had agreed to a match that everyone involved understood would be physical at a serious level. What Brock delivered inside that match exceeded what even the most experienced people watching backstage were prepared to witness. Lesnar delivered repeated ground pound elbows directly to Orton's forefoot while Orton was on the mat beneath. These were not theatrical blows engineered to simulate impact while protecting the person receiving. They were hardware elbows, the industry term for strikes intended to open a cut through the direct application of blunt force rather than through the concealed use of a blade. The elbows split Orton's forehead. Blood ran steadily down his face and pooled on the mat around while the match was still in progress. Referee assessed the scene, evaluated what he was looking at, and stopped the match. Not because a scripted finish had reached, because Orton had submitted or been pinned, because a professional referee looked at a professional performer lying in a gathering pool of blood and made the only responsible decision available in that moment. Backstage, the reaction was immediate and serious. Performers watching from the gorilla position and from the locker room area were alarmed at a level that went beyond the normal post-match discussion of a physically demanding contest. Many of them believed with genuine conviction that Brock had made a unilateral decision to go further than any performance context could justify and had taken dangerous liberty with a colleague's physical well-being. The concern was not mild or quickly passed. It came from experienced people who had spent their careers developing a clear practical sense of what difference between working hard and working recklessly looks like, watching something that appeared to them to fall clearly and alarmingly into the second category. The hard way bleeding of Randy Orton became one of the most discussed and debated moments in the modern history of WWE, not because it was simply violent, but because it was violent in a way that revealed something real about the power structure behind curtain. It showed that the line between performance and genuine physical harm had been moved, and that the move had been sanction. It showed that Brock Lesnar's ring presence was not being managed primarily by the same standard that applied to every other scheduled match on every other night. It was being managed by a different and more permissive standard that only he had access to. Chris Jericho had been watching from the gorilla position for the duration of the match. He had seen the entire season. He was furious in a way that was entirely real and entirely unscripted. When Brock walked backstage through the curtain, Jericho was standing. What followed was a genuine confrontation between two performers, not a planned interaction or a segment designed for television. A real face-to-face standoff between one person who was angry about what he believed had just been done to a colleague and another who apparently found the whole thing amusing and responded with mocking language that was offensive and deliberately provocative. Jericho is not someone who steps away from a confrontation, and he has stated that openly on many occasions. But he is also someone who processes situations with enough clarity to understand the physical reality in. Brock is a trained combat athlete with credentials that are entirely documented and verified. He is, by any objective measure, one of the most legitimately dangerous physical presences ever to work in professional wrestling. Jericho understood in practical terms what those credentials meant in any kind of real physical exchange. So he arrived at a specific and deliberate survival calculation. He decided that if Brock swung at him, he was going to bite his nose off. He described it in almost exactly those terms after. He said he was literally going to bite Brock's nose off. He understood that Brock very likely hurt him seriously in the process. He accepted that entirely. His resolution was that if he was going down, Brock was not going to have a nose after. That was the level of strategic thinking that a real backstage confrontation with Brock Lesnar required, not professional de-escalation or a reasoned conversation about mutual respect and appropriate limits. Plan involving biting someone's face as a mechanism of survival. Triple H and Vince McMahon had to physically step in to prevent the situation from becoming something that could not be undone. When McMahon spoke to address the confrontation, he disclosed something that changed the entire meaning of what had happened during the SummerSlam match. He told Jericho directly and plainly that he had personally authorized the hard way elbows. He had given Brock the specific instruction to deliver real strikes to Orton in precisely the manner he had executed. It was not Brock making a unilateral and unsanctioned decision. It was Brock following an explicit and direct order from the chairman of the company to use genuine violence as a deliberate creative book. That disclosure named something that many people in that locker room had long felt to be true but had never heard stated plainly front. The safety covenant that governed every other performer in WWE did not apply to Brock the same way it applied to everyone else. Every other person in that company was expected to protect their partner, communicate throughout the match, and stay within the agreed parameters of formative safety. Brock operated under a separate executive license that permitted real damage and real force in ways that would have been immediately and permanent career-ending for any other performer. That license had not been established casually or informally, had been deliberately granted at the highest possible level of the organization, because Brock's unique capacity for genuine physical harm made his uniquely compelling and commercially valuable as a product. The locker room did not need anyone to further explain what that meant for their own individual situation. They already understood it. Now they had heard it confirmed by the person who had granted the license. Structural reality extended far beyond the ring and reached throughout the entire production. Matt Riddle made a direct and pointed claim grounded in his own experience of that environment. He said that every producer in WWE was afraid of Brock Lesnar, not certain producers with less experience. Every single one of them. Producers in WWE are the experienced veterans responsible for designing matches backstage, translating creative direction from management into the actual match structure, and ensuring that what happens in the ring is safe, coherent, serves the overall narrative. They are the operational layer between executive management and the performer. They are supposed to carry meaningful authority in the production process. According to Riddle, they hesitated with Brock in a way they hesitated with nobody. They would not challenge they would not propose alternative match structure if Brock expressed displeasure with what had been presented. They allowed him to bypass the standard planning process that governed every other performer on the roster, because the prospect of pushing back against him was too uncomfortable and too potentially volatile to act. Riddle was openly and specifically critical of this dynamic. He said he hated watching people get scared and then act on that fear rather than than on their professional responsibility. He believed the producers' collective reluctance had given Brock a level of creative control and effective veto power over match structure that the institutional framework was then unable to check, moderate, or correct in any meaningful practical way. The production meeting for the 2022 Royal Rumble illustrated this dynamic with particular clarity. The Royal Rumble is one of the most logistically complex and narratively loaded matches on the entire WWE calendar. Multiple performers have to be coordinated around a single structure. Multiple storylines have to be served simultaneously. The match has to deliver meaningful and memorable moments for many different people within a single time. Brock reportedly walked into the planning meeting for that event and declined to participate in the collaborative process in any genuine or meaningful sense. He communicated to the other talent present that they should simply do business for. He determined his own spots and his own elimination without any real collaborative negotiation and expected the entire structure of the match to be organized around his preference. Nobody in that room found an effective means pushing back against that dynamic with enough force to change. Riddle's own confrontation with Brock at that Rumble generated enough institutional concern that management responded with a structural decision. They moved Riddle from one brand to the other, not to address the source of the tension through a direct and honest organizational conversation, to have a meaningful discussion about how Brock was functioning in that production environment and what changes might be appropriate. They moved the other person. That is what institutional accommodation of fear looks like in its most honest and practical form. It reorganizes everything and everyone else around the source of the problem rather than addressing the source direct. Page offered a perspective on Brock that required no in-ring experience to form. Asked about what Brock was genuinely like to encounter backstage, she gave a direct and uncomplicated answer. She said he was scary. She said he was definitely scary when you first meet. She described him as an intimidating man, massive, someone whose physical scale and the particular intensity of his personal presence create an immediate involuntary reaction in anyone sharing the same space. She was not describing character or a television personality. She was describing the experience of being in the same building as this specific person and what that produced in her without any preparation or advance framing. That matters because Paige had no professional incentive to sell Brock danger. She was not part of a rivalry with us. She was simply someone who worked in the same environment, and she found him genuinely frightening. Is entirely consistent with everything that every other person who described their experience Brock from any angle had communicated. Fear was not performance. It was the actual and persistent baseline emotional reality of working in the same professional environment as Brock Lesnar. Even the most historically significant and carefully protected figure in the entire history of WWE treated Brock with a seriousness they reserved for real-world threats rather than professional adversaries. Shawn Michaels has a career that spans multiple decades of the highest level of professional wrestling. He is widely regarded as one of the finest in-ring performers business has ever seen across any era. He has worked through numerous generations of WWE, absorbed serious punishment from some of the most physical work across all of those generations, and maintained a reputation for being effective and professional in every environment the business required of him. He warned Triple H about Brock Lesnar before their match together. That warning was not constructed for effect or designed to serve a narrative. It was a measured and considered message from someone who had specific and direct personal experience to ground it in. Michaels said he had been in the ring with the toughest people that this line of work has ever produced across long history. He said that Brock was on a whole different level from all of them, not harder than the majority of his career opponents, not more intense than the average in a roster full of intense, dedicated form, a whole different. From someone with Michael's history of experience, that framing is not casual or imprecise. He was speaking from something that had happened to him directly and personally. Brock had previously attacked in a parking garage and applied a Kimura lock. Kimura is a submission hold targeting the shoulder and elbow joint. When applied at full force and without a controlled or cooperative release, generates structural damage to the arm that goes beyond what training and conditioning can protect against. Brock snapped snapped his arm with it. It applied the hold with controlled pressure until Michaels could find a way to adjust or escape. He snapped the arm. Happened in a parking garage, in an environment where the normal controls of a match set had already been removed, and the result reflected the reduced degree of safety the environment provided. Shawn Michaels stands in front of a person he cares about and warns them clearly that what they are about to face is unlike anything they have previously encountered in their career. That warning carries full accumulated weight of his history in the business and his personal experience of exactly what he is describing. He understood the practical and meaningful difference between physically demanding and genuine dangerous situations. He was communicating clearly that Brock Lesnar belonged in the second category without any qualification or soft. What made the Beast paradigm particularly difficult for the people inside it was that there was no straightforward way to address it. The institutional protection that should have applied equally to everyone had been deliberately modified to exclude one person. The collective understanding in the locker room was clear and widely shared, but the authority to change the situation sat with the same people who had decided to create it first, left everyone else with a simple and uncomfortable choice: accept the term as they existed or step away from the programs and the opportunity that came with. Most people accepted the term. Choice deserves to be understood rather than judged, because the professional cost of the alternative was significant and real. But the fact that people had to make that choice at all is the final and clearest evidence of what the Beast paradigm actually meant for the people who had to live inside it. If you made it all the way through this story, leave a like worth your time today, subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and drop comment below telling us which moment from this video hit hardest for you. See you in the next.